Hello again. We're moving into the book of Judges today, and we get to Judges. Judges is a new era here. We just have Israel has had two dynamic leaders, Moses and Joshua, one to bring them out of Egypt, the other to bring them into the promised land of Canaan. And now we're moving to a new era in this book called Judges, because now what happens is, with both of these dynamic leaders gone, God is really looking to the people of Israel to govern themselves by His word and by His commandments from within, and for them to just, possess their land, have their own, community and whatever, but to really oversee and follow His laws and follow Him. And by doing that, they'll be powerful and prominent and peaceful and everything that they need to be in their area. So when we get to Judges, they've now settled in the promised land, or in some case they're settling into the promised land. And so chapter 1 begins with actually they're conquering Jerusalem, taking over Jerusalem. And then they inquire of the Lord, who should go up first in this battle? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up before I've given the land into his hand. And so, a lot of people have taken this. Judah is one of the ways you translate Judah is just simply praise. It applies to praise. So many have aptly applied, I think, the idea of sending Judah ahead to conquer as relating to us, that we should begin all of our personal battles with praise. So that's kind of an application here. That's not what the Bible's actually saying here, in those words. But I think several times in the scriptures we see this. Judah is supposed to go up first. And so their battle to overtake Jerusalem starts with Judah, praise. Anyway, so they do take Jerusalem, they're conquering the land, and we get a quick look in Judges 1 back at our character Caleb. Caleb was one of the two, Caleb and Joshua, who were promised that from that generation they would enter the land because they were the two spies with the good reports. And so in chapter 1, we see Caleb mentioned in verse 12, and he says here, Caleb said, the one who attacks Kiriath Sepher and captures it, I will even give him my daughter Achsah for a wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, so it's Caleb's nephew, captured it, so he gave him his daughter Achsah for a wife. And so we see Caleb's mentioned here again. Caleb is 80 years old at this point. I'm pretty impressed he's got a daughter at this point that's marrying age, just getting married. He's 80 years old. But anyway, he tells basically kind of another application for the scripture. It says, if you can win your own battles, then you're capable of having my daughter as your wife. If you can win your personal battles, then you qualify. So Othniel, who turns out to be a judge as we go on here, Othniel is the one who does that and takes on Caleb's daughter as his wife. Chapter 2, we see that Israel did not, I guess God commanded, drive out all the inhabitants out of the land. They were supposed to drive them out. Why was they supposed to drive them out? Because they worshipped other gods. They had influence into that culture. They would be ensnared by the principles and the practices of those gods and their form of worship toward them. And so he goes on in chapter 2, it says, verse 1, now the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land which I sworn to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And as for you, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land. You shall not tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? Therefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become as thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. Here's once again that kind of concept, Paul used in the New Testament as a thorn in the flesh, a thorn in the side, and it's those things that are still abiding there that fight against our relationship and the promises of God. And here, a thorn in the side, their gods shall become a snare to you. And it's just the warning, but it's true. It happens over and over again. They allow these nations to remain, and they get influenced by their gods, which usually involves like child sacrifice and prostitution. And there's all kinds of things involved with the worship of these gods that infiltrates and affects and infects Israel. In chapter 2, we see a recap of what we saw at the end of Joshua. It says, at verse 6, when Joshua had dismissed the people, the sons of Israel went each to his inheritance to possess the land. So everyone's got their own possession, and this is part of their freedom, is possessing the land. It's actually interesting that in the history of America, American leaders in the beginning saw the possession of property as a key sign of freedom. And we see that here is that each one possessed their own land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who had seen all the great work of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Then Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. That's the same thing we read in the end of Joshua, the book of Joshua. Here we see it recapped again. And we see that in verse 10, all the generations also were gathered to their fathers, and there also arose a generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work of the Lord which he had done for Israel. So that's the setting for the book of Judges, is we got a people that don't really remember Joshua. They don't remember Moses. They don't remember God's covenant. They don't remember the things that God did in bringing them into this land. And so Israel, under that, with that background, we find that they succumb to Baal worship. And when they succumb to Baal worship, they're suppressed by their enemies. And so we see God, what then the book of Judges goes over and over again is Israel's disobedience, leaving God, getting in desperate straits, crying out to God. God raises up somebody that rescues them. And the first one he raises up is this Othniel that we read about earlier that married Caleb's daughter. It says in verse 9 of chapter 3, when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the sons of Israel to deliver them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. And that's the story, once again, over and over in Judges. Several judges are raised up in different times. In chapter 4, it's Deborah is raised up, and she works in connection with a man named Barak. And they fight against Sisera and defeat the Canaanites. And it's a story. I say if you read the book of Judges, and if it was ever made into a movie, it would probably just have to be X-rated. Judges would be an X-rated movie. If you want to read an X-rated book in the Bible, read Judges. That might be attraction for you. Maybe that'll be motivation for you to read the book of Judges. You all need to read it. It's quite an interesting book, but there are some things in here that are just bizarre. This thing, when Deborah is raised up and she's chasing Sisera along with Barak. Barak is leading the military charge of it. Finally, Sisera has run out of energy, and he comes upon this household, and this woman lets him in. But when she lets him in, he's got a big surprise because he falls down in her tent to sleep. And she comes in with a tent peg and a hammer and hammers the tent peg right through the temple of his head. Delivers Sisera to Barak and Deborah dead. So that's how God raised up Deborah in that time to be the judge to bring freedom to Israel. Chapter 6, we see an introduction to one of the most famous characters in all of the book of Judges, and that's Gideon. But it says in verse 1, then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Okay, again. And the Lord gave them into the hands of Midian 7 years. Well, Midian, it's interesting. If you just look at the word Midian and what it means contention, essentially. And it's really interesting because what we're going to see in how God uses Gideon and Israel to defeat Midian and to free them from Midian, the word Midian, the people Midian, in its meaning of contention, the way he uses them to get free from that is by bringing them into a spirit of unity. That he defeats Midian, he defeats contention with unity. And we'll see that as we look further along here as we get back into our next session when we talk about Gideon and his part in being a judge and freeing Israel.